Hello and welcome to Early Childhood Ireland's podcast, which features interviews and discussions on all issues relating to high quality in the early years and school age care sector. In our episodes, we have a range of speakers who are leaders in the areas that matter to Early Childhood Ireland members. This podcast series is proudly supported by Aricus Insurance, which offers a comprehensive range of cover at discounted premiums for both business and personal insurance products. So visit www.aricus.ie for more information. I'm Maura Corbett and I work with Early Childhood Ireland. Every year, Early Childhood Ireland has commissioned Red C to conduct an opinion poll to gauge public attitudes to early years and school age care and education. We recently published the 7th edition of the Early Childhood Ireland Barometer, and in what is now an annual visit, I'm delighted to be joined by my colleague Frances Byrne, Director of Policy in Early Childhood Ireland, to explore the findings of this year's Barometer. Frances, as I say, is Director of Policy in Early Childhood Ireland and has a huge interest in advocating for children in early years and school age care in member settings in Ireland in relation to government policy. So, Frances, you're most welcome and thanks for joining me today. I really enjoyed this chat, teasing out the issues and findings of the Barometer.
Thanks very much, Maura. It's always a pleasure.
I kind of start with this question every year, but just for people maybe who are new to the Barometer, can we start with a little bit of background to the Barometer? Why do we do this every year?
So we initially started in 2018. I couldn't believe it when we were putting the materials together this year that it was our 7th one. I have to always I double check, I go back and look and go, are we sure? Yes, it is. So we started out really trying to be very frank, have a kind of a baseline, find out ourselves, what do the Irish public think about early years and school age care? What are their views? Try and gauge their levels of support for different aspects of the work. And I suppose to broaden out the context for this, for Early Childhood Ireland, we have a complex world in terms of policy development. So we have our stated aims and ambitions for our sector, for children who are in the sector, for children who haven't even been born yet in a future sector. We also then have policies that the government has said it's going to implement, commitments that it's made, for example, in First 5, in the programme for government, which is called Our Shared Future, and other very key documents. So we monitor them as well to make sure. And I suppose this poll, which is an absolute privilege to commission every year, and we never forget that within Early Childhood Ireland, that this is it's great to be able to do this. We then want to see, what does the public think either of things that are happening that we know are coming? So a few years ago, we asked very specific questions about childminding because we knew, as everyone did, the childminding action plan was coming. And then sometimes there are, how can I put this, things in the policy ether or the political ether that we are interested in and that we would like to find out so that it can help our work, help our understanding. And of course, we have a press office in the organisation that is out in the media proactively at least once or twice a month. We also have a lot of reactive requests. So we're also, I suppose, looking at more broadly what's going on in Ireland vis-a-vis our sector. And we don't always get a chance to do that because we're doing the work without sounding overprivileged and entitled, and it is a wonderful privilege. The Barometer gives us, or the poll gives us a moment, an important milestone every year to stop and look and see where are things at across the board. So it's really great to be able to do it. And then we produce the Barometer from the annual poll. And we've been asking some questions for a few years. And as you said, there are a couple of new questions this year.
I'll ask you about the new questions in a few minutes. Maybe before we go there, can you take us through the key findings that we announced recently?
Absolutely. So again, this year we have very strong support among the Irish public for the statement that every child in the country should be guaranteed access to high quality, inclusive early years and school age care in their own community. 76% agree, and that stays strong across the board. So I should say that Red C employs a very proper methodology for ensuring that it's capturing the views of a representative sample. And it also then within the findings gives us demographic breakdowns. Now, we don't go out saying half of women, we say 70% of everybody, but we're able to show in the barometer levels of support by gender breakdown, for some results, by regional breakdown, by province. We're able to show by age, by whether people, their work status, whether they're working or not outside the home, and indeed whether they're parents or not. So it's interesting to see within the overall what the individual demographics look like. So this finding received across the board support. We then have a finding which says that almost 3/4, so 74%, a tiny bit lower, think that early years education should be freely available to all children. And of course, people who work in the sector will know that that's not the case. People outside will say, what about the free preschool year? But of course, that's not what we mean. We mean in the broadest sense. 2/3 believe that education for children under 5 is as important for those over 5. And this is obviously very buoying for our work, because that's 2/3 of the population values early years in particular, which is something for us to remind politicians about. And then one that we've asked year on year, 2/3 say that parents should be financially supported to stay at home for their child's first year. And then finally, one that for now, not looking at the brand new ones for now, over half, 54%, think that employers should be legally obliged to top up new parents' maternity and paternity benefits. In other words, also during the first year. That's the second year in a row that we've asked that one. So overall, what we're saying is, in this year's barometer, that Early Childhood Ireland is really delighted to see overwhelming public support for access, for the value that is put on the education of children under 5. And it's our belief, and we'll be trying to make it so, that the current government, and indeed, we're very conscious that this is very likely to be the last barometer before the next election, although it's possible there may be another one depending on when it's called. But we will certainly be using this as part of our pre-election lobbying, our pre-budget lobbying this year. The fact that there's such a strong support among the public for the sector and for children in the sector.
So clearly the public feels positive about investment in the early years and school age care sector. And can we infer that there's support for increased investment?
I would love to infer that. And certainly, I think that there's a reality, for example, around the 2/3 say parents should be financially supported. That means that we've to move from where we are now, and great progress has been made in terms of the numbers of weeks. But there are still absolutely parents, and I think particularly dads, if they happen to be the main breadwinner in the house, whomever is the main breadwinner. But regardless, in a 2-parent family, if income is going to fall dramatically, because our rates of maternity and paternity benefit, unlike some other countries, are not linked to the wages of those who work outside the home. So certainly there's recognition, I think, behind that. But no, strictly speaking, we can't infer that. But we certainly can say to politicians, look, not to be overly cynical about this, but to be very direct with them and say, this is a win-win for you. Therefore, greater investment is a win-win. And look, there isn't a politician in the state, and I don't believe anybody serious who will be running for public office for the first time, say, for the next election, who doesn't know that Ireland is coming from a low base in terms of investment. Despite reaching the 1 billion in 2023, we're still hundreds of millions, if not billions, behind other countries. So we will certainly be using it to say, look, everybody knows we need greater investment. The Irish public is behind you, I suppose, is what we could say, and stand up in terms of the barometer findings.
Yeah, and that the support is there, and people are, I suppose, mature enough to know that those statements mean more money. So, if you're in favour of increased supports, it means you kind of recognise that more money needs to be spent. So,
yeah, absolutely, and we've had great We've had great media coverage since we launched this year's Barometer, and certainly the local and regional media all over the country. That's one of the first questions: is, well, how is this going to be paid for? How much will it cost, and so on. So of course, it's people are aware of it, absolutely. So yeah, you're absolutely right, and we would be saying, look, this is going to cost money, but the Irish public is completely behind it.
So we mentioned a few minutes ago that we had some new questions in. Can you take us through what those questions were, why we introduced them to the Barometer, and what the results, what the findings were from those two questions?
Certainly. So I think just by way of background, we did have a previous question about terms and conditions, which was quite a convoluted one, and our good colleagues at this point, we know them well in Red C, had really helped us to reshape it over the years, because it was really about an EU directive that said that when early years and school age staff were qualified to the same level as teachers, say that they should match. But it was, we wanted to be true to what instead of putting words in the European Union mouth. That directive has come and gone. So this year we asked it the way you would ask it in plain English. Do you agree that staff with a university degree should have the same terms and conditions as primary school teachers? 54% agree. So it isn't brand new, but it's new, and we are going to repeat a new way of phrasing it. The other one, though, is brand new, and this is one of the ones that I talked about earlier, more the vexed question of pay for staff. And it's a vexed question because there are absolutely developments going on about it. But we also know that in countries where we have that high quality, inclusive early years and school age care across the country that parents can take for granted and so on, the payment of the cover of terms and conditions for staff has been dealt with. Now, it's dealt with in different ways in different jurisdictions. So we were very interested to find out what the views were, and the views were that over half, 53% think that government should pay the wages. I suppose the other reason, is that it's very much in the ether in Ireland, because we have an employment regulation order, and now going into its second year. We also know that there, is a very definitely a move towards a more publicly funded model. And that whole question is going to arise then. And interestingly, in the media interviews, what some of the journalists and so on, broadcasters, have been focusing on is, does that mean that fees would fall? And of course, that is one of the reasons why there are lower fees in other countries, because the wages are covered, because as we found out during COVID, when there was a lot of analysis of data, up to 78% of the outgoings in the average setting. It's not 78% for all, so I'm choosing my words very carefully to be accurate. But up to 78% is spent on terms and conditions for staff. And yet we know that, as our members tell us every day of the week, their number one issue, even if it isn't live at the moment, it is absolutely the number one issue on their minds all the time, which is about staffing. And of course, we also know that we have a kind of a very unfunny joke in early childhood Ireland among the staff, which is, if the minister walked in the door and said to you, I can only do one thing, what's the one thing? You have to be able to answer the question. And I think for us, the answer to the question is, you would absolutely have to invest in staffing first and foremost. There are lots of other things to be done, and it doesn't solve, it isn't necessarily the magic bullet that people might think it is, but we know that it's absolutely critical that we address the retention issues in particular, because we know that continuity of relationship, that centrality of the continuity of relationships with children, and of course with their parents in a different way, is so critical for children. So for that reason alone, it ticks a big box. So we were very curious to see, and it's very interesting that more than half the population agrees, and we're very buoyed by that. And absolutely we'll be letting, and we already have, let policymakers know that.
So basically, for the staff with the same qualifications as primary teachers, it was 54%, and the government should pay the wages of staff. It was 53%. Yeah, so
over half for both, which is really good, and
comfortably over half, which is very good.
Really good, and I think it's particularly good. I think it's particularly interesting for the one that we've asked for completely for the first time, that we haven't rephrased, and it would be very interesting because we've made the decision we're going to ask both of them next year. So it'll be very interesting to track that over the next few years
to see what trends are there on that.
I mean, it's no surprise in one way. Parents will tell you, and it did shoot up to a much higher level for parents of young children. Now, look, again, we have to be careful. That's not, we can't say that therefore X% of every parent. We can't say that, but it was just very interesting. So obviously, parents of younger children recognise the value of educators and practitioners in their children's lives, which is no surprise to anyone. But it's really good, and I think that there's an understanding among older age groups as well. We've now lived through more than a decade of the so-called free preschool year of ECHI. 98% of 3-year-olds are going in the doors of a preschool or a preschool room every day to as part of that program. There's no doubt that aunties, uncles, and grandparents, everybody has seen the value, and therefore the value that's placed on staff has no doubt in my mind increased. And it's one of those questions that you kind of wish we'd asked 7 years ago, because it'd just be interesting to see. But certainly, and I'm always saying it, if anybody had bothered polling before the ECHI scheme, I absolutely can't prove this, can't go back in time, but I absolutely believe that the rates for support would have been much lower. I think it's been transformative in terms of the general public's understanding of how critical it is. And I think also COVID has played a role. I think that during COVID, people suddenly realized, first of all, I think in a very practical way, oh my goodness, the world is opening up again. I now have to go back to work and all of that. But I think more fundamentally, people could see in the couple of months and other times when their children didn't have access to their creche, their setting, the difference it made, and the appreciation, I think, among parents. We heard this a lot for the settings that were able to do things online and or do things outdoors when it was safe to do so. So I think that all of that, even though COVID was dreadful and you wouldn't go through it again, but those realities, I think, have really informed people's understandings of the importance of the work of the sector.
Absolutely. I think, there were so much we want to forget about COVID, but I think there were certainly relational things that it gave us a huge appreciation of the importance of, and we need to remember that. I think, we forget it at our peril.
No, absolutely, and I think that the instinct is to look back on that really difficult period and focus on what we got wrong. And listen, there's going to be a government inquiry and all of that. There's already one in the UK, but I think for Early Childhood Ireland, we would also want to say there were some really good things. The outdoors in particular is the big one. I mean, it's just now completely and totally accepted. It's amazing the way it has shifted.
Absolutely.
Not just accepted, welcomed. People want it and understand it when the conversations begin. And there's no doubt that COVID played a role in that. A very small upside, but it's there nevertheless.
Clouds and silver linings kind of come to mind. So, Frances, thanks for I think we've covered the main questions. Is there anything in kind of summary or conclusion that you want to say about the barometer?
Well, I suppose for us, it's we ask ourselves then as an organisation, I suppose some challenging questions. Looking at the overall picture, we have 7 years now of data for some questions to track. And I suppose our question then as an organisation is, what are we going to do with it? Like, not quite a so what, but an internal so what to ourselves. And I suppose for us, it is absolutely happening in the context of enormous change. But also there is going to be an election. There has to be one, if I'm doing my maths correctly, by next March. But certainly, the last one was February 2020. So I think according to our constitution, it has to be. So look, we're going to use the findings to keep our policy asks front and central in the minds of all the candidates, independent party and who will be running, to say to them, we've really good news. We reached a significant milestone in 2023. A, we need a new one. B, we need a coherent 5-year plan to tell us how we're going to get there so that our members, families and staff can have certainty about what the next 5 years looks like. And we're going to be able to say the Irish public is behind this. And, politically, this is a win-win. We've long said that this may not be solvable by one government, but actually, given the progress we've made, the next government could do an awful lot and possibly everything that needs to be done to put us on the same level as our beloved, admired Scandinavian and Nordic countries. So that's, I suppose, for us, the next step. And, I suppose what I would say to listeners is that, this is important work for everybody. We'd certainly be encouraging people, in your local communities, among friends, neighbours, whether they're running for office or not, to be talking about this. This is, really good. We often hear the downsides, the challenges, which are very real, particularly in relation to staffing for the sector. But it's really good to know, and everyone, I hope, will be buoyed by the fact we certainly are in Early Childhood Ireland, that the Irish public is very much behind all of us. So to hold on to that, I think, is important, and we hope that people will. And look, we're, as you can tell, always delighted to talk about the Barometer. So if any of the listeners have queries, policy@earlychildhoodireland.ie, delighted to answer them. We did have some after last year's podcast, people who were curious. We were delighted to get them. So please get in touch with us if you have any questions.
Great. And you will find all the details on our website, and I will put the link to the Barometer and the associated press release on the show notes, so you can see all the lovely graphics. And, Frances, you mentioned about the different levels of support among the different demographic groups. You'll see the specifics of all that on the designed materials, so you can check it out there. Frances, thanks so much. It's just so interesting to kind of drill into it a little bit and tease it out and see the trends that might emerge in the future and so on. So Frances, as ever, thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Maura. Delighted to talk to you about the Barometer.
And thank you for listening to this episode of Early Childhood Ireland's podcast, which is proudly supported by Aricus Insurance. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe, spread the word to your friends and colleagues, and stay tuned for our next episode.